Hello, this is Ty Newell with the second of our COVID status reports. Unlike yesterday, which was an introduction to these reports, this one will be more abbreviated, which is difficult for a university professor to do after 30 years. Today's data, as of March 31st, showing that in the US, we're rapidly approaching 200,000 infections, and those of you that are following it quite closely know that we've exceeded 200,000 as of today. But the data I'm using is that published through worldometers.info, and the latest data that I have plotted is as of March 31st. And just from this basic plot showing the number of infections in these 9 countries, that the US is far outpacing, rapidly increasing more than any other country. And given that China is a much, much larger, more populous country, that is not the excuse for the US that we're bigger than the other countries that I'm comparing us to. We're just doing a really, really poor job containing this. I mentioned this infection parameter, basically a rough estimate of infections per infected person over a 14-day period. And for example, on average, that means that if we have an infection level of 14, then that is, say, an infected person that one day of the 14 days that they're sick, they're able to communicate that disease to one other person. Now, it looks like the US and the UK have made good progress, but basically we have gone from being very bad to bad, and less bad does not mean being good. The level that is hopefully not a plateau for the US and the UK is horrendous. And as we'll discuss, it puts us on a path for a few 100,000 deaths, as well as tens of millions of infections in this first wave that's moving around the world. And unless we decide that we're a bunch of lemmings marching toward a cliff and ready to go, we need to do something about it. It may feel like we have, but we haven't. This doesn't mean that every place in the US or in the UK is doing poorly, but it on average means that we are. Some states, such as Washington, has gotten their act together, gotten controls in, and is much better. New York also is hopefully moving toward a better contained spread of the disease. But as you hear on the news, many other states are squandering this valuable time to put serious constraints and restrictions into place. On the other side of things, and as I mentioned also, this data on a daily basis depends on the accuracy of what's reported. And some days there may be more accuracy or less, or some catching up or lagging behind in reporting of data. And that will lead to some noise. But in general, you can see that this parameter, as I've defined it, that it is fairly stable, and you do tend to see trends that are indicative of how well we're doing or not. Also, as we discussed, ideally we get this down to 1. We are no longer having an infected person spreading the disease. If we can get down to a level of 2, we can start to see recoveries outpace infections and start getting to a place where we're no longer overstraining and stressing our medical personnel and our supplies. And at this point, we're seeing that Italy has a very encouraging trend, getting down to a level that South Korea has been maintaining for some time. We see Spain on its way to that, and we very much hope that Spain can continue to improve and drop from there. France seems to have a few days of data that show an increase, and hopefully not a trend, but rather um, something related to the way data is being reported. But it looks as if they're struggling, and hopefully we'll see in the next few days of data a return back to where they and Germany appear to be heading. Germany looks like it's doing quite well, marching toward an infection parameter of 2 and hopefully below. Iran also shows some encouraging movement. More improvement is needed, cutting the infection parameter in half to really get things under control and again get into the range of where South Korea has been maintaining. And the US and the UK, we've got to do better. We need to get serious. What feels like we may have changed, we haven't. Isolation means isolation. Distancing means distancing. If you're seeing someone different each day for the next 2 weeks and you happen to be infected, whether you know it or feel it or not, that's a parameter of 14. And for every person that does that, that weighs heavily into this metric. So this plot that I showed last night, some trends for the US, because we are the worst in the world right now as far as a large population on a very, very bad path, that as I add the circle data, which is the actual data reported on worldometers.info, you can see us moving. And if we do not get off this path of an infection parameter of 6 to 7, we're going to expect to see the data follow this red line. And over the course of 1 month, we are going to see more than 10 million infections, and with an estimated mortality, although in many places it's much greater than 1%, but an estimated mortality of 100,000. 100,000 deaths. Can you fathom that? I can't. In Vietnam, which was horrendous, 58,000 deaths. We're going to be hearing about people we know every day in increasing numbers. I don't understand this placid feeling that we can just keep marching along or accept that 100,000 deaths over a month's time is acceptable. When have we seen a catastrophe of that level over a few months period? I can't remember many. There's been some horrendous acts of nature around the world that have cost tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of lives. But this is preventable. This is not something sneaking up on us. If we get serious about socially isolating and distancing, and this talk about it's mostly direct contact, and if you're 6 feet away from each other, you're okay, this is nonsense. A sneeze and a cough cloud travels over 20 feet. Read the literature. Read the work of Professor Burabida out of MIT. She studies sneezes and cough fluid mechanics, and she has alerted people that this cloud of infectious droplets travels much, much further than 6 feet. So don't feel safe at 6 feet. Isolate yourself. And if we can get to where South Korea is, maybe we'll only be over 1 million in a month's time. And if we can do even better than that, which we should be able to do, that we can maybe keep this below 1 million infections, and hopefully that doesn't overstress our resources, and we can keep this down to maybe only tens of thousands of deaths. Again, a horrendous number, an unacceptable number. We are at war and we need to defeat this thing. So I'm going to end on one final thing. I wanted to mention we need to be preparing throughout the United States and countries all over the world as this picks up steam. And hopefully you're able to not follow the lead of the US on this. but we're going to need field hospitals. We're going to need many of them. We are going to need many, many more beds. And one suggestion that if you're in contact with folks, either in airlines or in your local airports, the gates at every airport throughout the US and throughout most of the world have all the facilities needed to run uh, temporary tent hospital shelters. It's essential that those recovering, as well as medical personnel, that they're kept comfortable. Recovery is very, very much improved with comfortable, fresh air moving through whatever building. At the end of each gate, I show a picture here of what's called a PCA, or a preconditioned air unit. And you've seen these with the big yellow ducks under them. And the reason I'm familiar with them is because I design them. I've designed them for the military, for fighter aircraft. I've designed them for UPS and FedEx for mobile trailers. And I've designed them for this unit here, which happens to be in Orlando. But there's units in every airport around the US and around the world. This conditioning unit will blow around 3,000 to 4,000 cubic feet per minute of fresh air. It's conditioned. The cooling capacity is somewhere typically in the range of 30 to 90 tons, depending on whether it's a regional jet or a wide body. And that's enough for keeping comfortable 75 to 100 people. These are beasts of a machine. They take outdoor air in the hot, humid Orlando weather, and they cool it down to 30 to 40 degrees, pulling moisture out of it as well as delivering cool air. And if you think of these temporary shelters with 100, 200, 300 beds placed in them, being similar to an aircraft with 100, 200, 300 people jammed in their seats, that this facility, since our airports are currently dead in the water, who would want to travel now? And during this time, if our airports would cordon off a section, you have sewage, you have water, you have all the electrical power in the world, you have kitchen facilities, you have security personnel, you have professional maintenance staff and airlines staff that could be available. This is a possibility for any of our community, as the size of the airport typically scales with the city. So Atlanta, Hartsfield, LaGuardia, O'Hare, take a look, discuss, but these may be the place where you'd want to locate these, as we need to shuffle critical medical equipment and supplies from one area of the afflicted country to another. It would make sense to be able to fly it in and then conveniently get it over to these facilities where people are recovering. In any case, that's just a suggestion. I'll end with stay home. Don't elbow bump. It sounds cool, but we've all been trained to sneeze and cough into our elbows. So it's like the most infectious part of your body. So don't elbow bump, just wave or nod your head. And support and thank our essential workers and our medical support, working tireless hours and really under a lot of strain, as well as getting infected at among the highest rates of anyone. Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow night.